On traumatic bonding, and one of the reasons why is because my career was really developed around the topic of trauma. And when I started providing counseling and consultations overseas, I realized that traumatic bonding was a serious problem, and it was a little bit more serious than I actually thought it was. I thought traumatic bonding was just in families that had domestic violence and enmeshment and intergenerational trauma, but as I started counseling more people overseas and offering consultations and, getting credentialed and getting information in this area, I realized that, wait a minute, traumatic bonding is happening all over the world, and it's happening in situations where we wouldn't expect it to happen. I want to talk about what traumatic bonding is, but I also want to highlight some of the things that makes you vulnerable to traumatic bonding. And I'm also going to throw in some shared psychosis. It's no longer called shared psychosis, so I'm going to update that as well. But just for the purposes of making this, more clear to you, I'm going to highlight shared psychosis. And let me briefly introduce myself before we jump in. My name is Tamara, and I'm an internationally and board certified trauma therapist. I'm licensed in mental health, and I specialize in treating children, teens, and families, as well as adults who are dealing with trauma. Let's go ahead and jump in. So what is traumatic bonding? Let me give you a really easy explanation, because I talk about this topic on my channel quite a bit. I'll post some videos and the cards as we go along, which you'll find right up here. I've talked about detoxing from a traumatic bond. I've talked about exactly what a traumatic bond is, how it impacts you. But I'm going to tweak this topic just a little bit and add shared psychosis. And I'm going to update you on some terms as well. So what is traumatic bonding? The way that I want you to see is that you are inappropriately entwined with this individual. You are interconnected with this individual, almost enmeshed and stuck in a dynamic that is really hard for you to get out of. Okay, it's an emotional, psychological, and even physical connection and skewed bond that really puts you in a certain mindset that maybe isn't healthy for you in the long run, So let me give you an example of that. Let's say you have a father who you love dearly and you don't know exactly why your relationship has changed over time. It just changed. Your dad lost his job. He started, smoking cigarettes and smoking marijuana and drinking. And all you know is that your father is a different person. He's not the same dad that you've always loved and respected. He started sexually abusing you or physically abusing you, and you didn't know how to marry those two things, right? My dad and my love for him and his abuse of me. So what did you do? Well, most likely, because it's really hard for you to keep those two things in your mind, most likely you kind of pushed aside and into the background the sexual and physical abuse, and you pushed forward in your mind the positive theories about your father. And what happened there is you can continue to love your father based on that skewed perception of the relationship. It's easy to engage in that skewed perception of the relationship because you love your dad, when it's all said and done, right? You may also find yourself really denying what he's done. You may also find yourself minimizing what he's done. And you may also find yourself stonewalling or putting up a brick wall and really refusing to talk about it to people who see exactly what's going on between you and your dad. Because of all of this, right, you have entered a traumatic bond, and that's an inappropriate and unhealthy enmeshment or connection within a relationship. It makes it really hard for you to be objective, really hard for you to step out of that unhealthy bond when it's all said and done. So that is traumatic bonding. That's a simplified explanation of what it is. Now, what makes us susceptible to traumatic bonding? Well, I think it's appropriate to, really focus on what's called risk factors. Now, risk factors are things that make us emotionally and psychologically vulnerable to further problems down the road. So risk factors may be something like low socioeconomic status, being raised in a violent neighborhood, being raised in an urban or inner city area, untreated trauma, mental health or substance abuse issues. It could be harassment and a history of bullying. It could be early sexual experiences, molestation or rape, delinquency. It could also be failing in school, loss of employment, right? Those are all risk factors that makes it easier for a parent to slip into an unhealthy mentality and a relationship with a child. And that can help create a traumatic bond. I'll give you an example of this. Let's say the same father that we just talked about who's sexually abusing you, but who you refuse to walk away from and tell other people about because you love him. Let's say the same father not only lost his job and can't pay the bills on time, put food in the refrigerator and make you happy and buy you clothes, but he has also refused to help you with your homework and take you to school, has refused to take you to work every day because your transportation is limited, right? He's already sexually molesting you and or he has in the past, and he's been physically and emotionally abusive. You're around all of this all the time, and all of those dynamics are making it a little bit more difficult for you to step out of that traumatic bond because you feel guilty that all of these things are happening. You almost feel responsible for the abuser, and you may find yourself over-identifying with the abuser in some ways. It's just simply easier to just go along than to go against the grains of what's happening. So that is kind of how traumatic bonding gets started, and it perpetuates. You may have a narcissistic and sociopathic parent who is finding it really, really hard to understand you and be empathic, because as I talked about in this video right up here recently, when you have a sociopathic parent or family member, it's really difficult to get them to feel the empathy that they need to feel in order to relate to you, right? They can't put themselves in your shoes. So, you're on your own. You may be over-identifying with someone who really could care less about your over-identification with them. You know what I mean? Like, you may have some compassion towards them, but they don't care about your compassion. So you're wasting your compassion, your energy, your mind on someone who's never going to change. And, that can sometimes keep a traumatic bond persisting and continuing throughout many years of your life. Now, let me highlight what happens to you in a traumatic bond. So, when you are traumatically bonded to a parent who is unhealthy, I think it's important to keep in mind that you may find yourself going through a period of over-identification, which is something I just talked about briefly. It's when you over-identify or cling to the parent because you feel that you guys can relate in some way, even though the reality is that you really can't relate. Let's say you were bullied. Let's say you were harassed. You may feel very sorry for your dad. You're emotional, but that parent is not, right? They could care less. They're abusive. They're unhealthy. They're toxic, maybe narcissistic, maybe sociopathic. And when you over-identify with an abuser, you become prey to them, right? You become vulnerable to them. So it's important to keep that in mind. The next thing is feeling indebted to them. You may feel that you need to give yourself, for example, sexually, emotionally, psychologically to that parent because, again, you're over-identifying and you have a very toxic and unhealthy and skewed relationship. And so in some pockets of your heart, you may feel that you need to give yourself to that parent, even though sexual abuse of a child is a horrible, horrible sin. It doesn't matter. You feel that you need to do this because you love your parent. The next thing is you may have the internal tucked away thought and feeling that your parent needs you no matter what, right? And they need me for psychological and emotional stability. They need me for financial stability. They need me to guide them and to direct them, right? The key word there is need. And when you feel like somebody needs you, you're willing to give all and everything to them, right? You're willing to give your all, I should say, to them. And unfortunately, if you're dealing with a traumatic bond, you don't need to give any more because you've given enough, right? But when you start to feel like he or she needs me, then you become a lot more vulnerable to that traumatic bond. The next thing is justifying and protecting. And I've seen this so much. I've seen this in toxic relationships. I've seen this in toxic ex relationships. I've seen this in toxic parent-child relationships, even in a toxic boss and employee situation, where you almost protect and justify the person's evil deeds. They can rob a bank and you're still going to justify and protect them. They could be racist and prejudiced and you're still going to justify them and protect them, right? And one of the reasons why is this traumatic bond. You are in an unhealthy connection with this person and you may be denying it in your mind. No, I'm not. I'm not upholding them. I'm not protecting them. I'm not justifying them. I know when they're wrong. The reality is no, you don't. Because in your heart, you're justifying the evil deeds of this person to keep the peace or to stay in good graces with or to continue to talk to this particular person. You know that person is evil. You know that person is uncaring and abusive, but you're going to protect and justify because you're in that traumatic bond. The next is wanting to please them and wearing multiple hats. Now, I kind of put those things things together because over the course of my career, over the past 14 years, I've seen individuals in a traumatic bond, and they wear multiple hats. They wear the wife hat, the parent hat, the parentified child hat, the teacher hat, the sexual partner hat. They wear every hat that they can think to wear to make sure that they stay in good graces with that abuser. When I talk about emotional incest on this channel, which you're going to find right up here in this video, you know, I'm highlighting in that video that there are some very, very, very sick parents who are sexually gratified by their children, and is the sickest thing to think about and to consider. I talk about that right up here in this video as well. It's such a depressing topic, but it is something I have to bring up because it's true, and that is a tragedy. The next thing is covering your emotions a lot, positive, negative, whatever, you know, covering your depression, covering your anxiety. You're going to cover it all because you want to please that person that you're traumatically bonded to, and especially if this is a parent, right? So, and that's really what I'm talking about in this video, is unhealthy and really sick parents, unstable parents, parents with, you know, personality disorders and really severe mental illnesses. You may cover your emotions because you want to make sure that that parent feels okay, that they don't feel blamed, that they don't feel unloved, right? You're there to patch everything up and make everything wonderful for them. And last but not least is desiring what they will never give you. That's another sign that you are traumatically bonded to your parent. You are desiring what they will never ever be able to give you. I talk about that right up here in this video, where I talk about jealous parents and kind of the dynamic of that situation there. That was a pretty interesting topic, and a topic that I really did want to bring to the channel, but I had a lot of people asking me, you know, can you please focus on jealous parents? And unfortunately, a lot of you on this channel can relate to that video. So go ahead and check that out at the end of this video. You know, there is the desiring of something that you're never going to have, because in your heart of hearts, you want that parent to love you, but unfortunately, they are jealous, unhealthy, abusive, uncaring, and maybe even narcissistic in a lot of ways. So how does shared psychosis fit into all of this? I'm going to post the French word right here so that you can see what it means. It means madness by two individuals, or madness shared by two individuals in French, okay? Here's what happens. You have a really sick parent, right? They are delusional. The primary diagnosis may be schizophrenia. It may be bipolar disorder. So let's say that this is what's happening. You have been around this individual so much. You have been traumatically bonded to this individual. You have also been enmeshed with this individual so much that now you are beginning to buy into the delusion of the parent. Now, the delusion could be one or two things. It could be bizarre, or it could be non-bizarre. Now, bizarre delusion is that aliens visited me last night, and you are my daughter or my son, and you're going to come with me when they come to get us tonight. And if you are sharing that psychosis with that parent, sharing that delusional system because you can't think for yourself, because you're so traumatically bonded with that parent, you're so enmeshed, you're probably going to go along with that delusional system until you are out from under that individual and can get appropriate treatment. Now, a non-bizarre delusion could be, there are cameras in my house, and I know they're my cameras because I put the security system in, but I also believe that the FBI is watching me through those cameras. I believe somebody has hijacked my camera from the internet and is watching me. It's non-bizarre because it can actually happen, right? There is a reason why there are computers and iPads with, you know, these camera covers, right? So that's a non-bizarre delusion. You may begin to believe that. It's not that you're psychotic, right? The parent is psychotic and unstable and needing of a lot of psychiatric treatment, but because you're so bonded and enmeshed and traumatically bonded with this parent, you believe it too. And unfortunately, this particular parent drags you in the mud because you're so bonded to them. Let me know in the comment section below if this is something that you have heard of, if you have seen, if you have experienced. It's a really traumatic situation, and a lot of adult children walk away from a situation like that, abused emotionally, psychologically, physically, sexually, and they have to live with that. And they are often diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder or acute stress disorder, chronic stress disorder, because of these particular parents. I will see you in the next video. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you want to stick around and get more information on these particular topics on my channel. Hit that bell button so you know every time I post a new video. Let me know in the comment section below if this video was helpful. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.